Welcome back to another episode of the Tommy Brideson Show. Now, today I wanted to talk about structuring your training week and your training sessions in a way that you can really maximize what you're trying to get out of it. Now, a really easy hack, it doesn't have to be the only way, but a really easy hack you can do is whatever you're working on most, whatever you're trying to get out of your training, put the main goal of it at the front end of the training week. Now, when you look at actual training programs and you look at, the split between your days, the split between exercises for recovery, for instance, logically speaking, there's normally a pretty even split. But with the work balance that we have, we're typically geared towards a Monday to Friday type work. And you'll find that towards the end of that work week, you'll get quite fatigued. Mentally, you'll have quite a lot of fatigue. If you're in a physical job, that will also carry over into physical fatigue as well. So by the end of the week, you want to start to look at putting your lowest priority sessions furthest away where you have the most energy at the start of the week. So let's put a bit of an example around this. Say, for instance, I had an injury and my main goal was to rehab that injury. Say it was an ankle injury. I would want to make sure that at the start of my week and at the start of each one of my training sessions, I'm really putting focus on the drills and the exercises that's going to help me rehab my ankle, because that's my main outcome. That's my main goal. Say, for instance, I was a powerlifter and I had a lift that was quite lagging. Say, for instance, your bench press was lagging. You're obviously going to bench press multiple times over the week, but you're probably going to a smart strategy is putting your bench press at the start of the week when you're freshest. So instead of, a typical split for a powerlifter is having squats straight up at the week. But the reality is anything that is lagging would really benefit from being at the forefront of your training week. So you can recover up over the weekend. You can get your recovery in, and then you can come into the week mentally and physically ready to attack your weak point. Now, from the rehab standpoint that I was talking before is, rehab is one of those real unique journeys where, the more effort you give it and the more frequency you get it, it's going to pay dividends. It's going to improve so quickly, because in the rehab journey, quite often you can't add a lot of weight. You can't, do a lot of stimulus that's going to be so fatiguing that's going to take a week to recover from. So continual bouts of effort is probably the best bet. So when you look at your actual training week, definitely get some really intensive stuff at the start of the week, but also then you can look at structuring your training days when you break them up, where you're putting whatever it is of the focus of that session at the very front. So you could look at it as either a pre-fatigue method or a pre-activation method. But say, for instance, I had a lagging body part and, all I wanted to do was build up a bigger chest and bigger arms. You could do an A1, A2, A3 series at the start of each one of your upper body sessions where you focus on those weak points first. So you've identified that, a seated chest press is really good for you. You get a great contraction. An easy bar cable curl and some skull crushers are really great exercises for you for your arms and for your chest. If you structure them at the start of your actual training session, when you're freshest and when you've got the most amount of energy, you can really put 110% effort into those exercises. So you're putting what you want and your goal and your outcome at the very front of your session so that you can really optimize your energy. Now, don't get me wrong, you're still going to have enough energy and you're still going to have enough gas to really, push through your accessory exercises afterwards. But the reality is, fresh of mind at the start of the session, you can really dial in on those exercises. Now, if we have a look at, how a day's training program is laid out and split, the typical way to look at it is that you have the most neurological or the hardest exercise at the very, very front, and then at the start of the day. And then as you progress through your training session, the exercises neurally get a lot easier and you can push out a lot more volume and you're just pushing more so to muscular failure. But a training program doesn't have to be laid out like that. You can have so much creativity within that actual, the scope of the week and the actual training session itself. Now, if someone was more, focused on bodybuilding, they were more focused on building muscle mass, they were more focused on activation and getting more structural balance within their system, you may actually just, aim to target all of these weak areas or smaller muscle groups at the very, very start of your training program. And, you can then put 110% effort into it. And because they're smaller muscle groups anyway, they're probably not going to take that much from your cup. So you're still going to be able to attack, say you had a main lift after that, really, really well. You're still going to be able to put a lot of effort into your other exercises. Like a typical split could be like an arm, like a bicep, a tricep, a chest, and then you might do bench press afterwards. Now, sure, my bench press exercise that I'm doing afterwards might not be as strong. That's okay, because that's not your main outcome of that particular training program is. It's bringing up the weak areas, or, activating, bringing awareness to areas of your body that you're trying to bring up. So, you shouldn't be at the strongest at that point in time, so when you look at your training week, there's so many ways to structure it. Now, if you look at like powerlifting, for instance, and you're looking at someone that's in the mix of a strength phase, and that they're starting to push the intensity up a little bit, they're obviously going to have their main lift at the start, because the risk reward of that exercise is really high. And you want to make sure that you're fresh, you're not fatigued, and you can come up and, put your best foot forward, because those exercises are hard, they're heavy, and they need a lot of bandwidth. Like say for instance, you did a full reverse program and you did, calves first, isolated hamstring, isolated quads, isolated glutes, and then you wanted to squat or deadlift after that, and it was heavy. It's a bit of a recipe for disaster, because you've completely fatigued everything. But your main outcome of that particular session would have been strength, right? So having strength at the very, very end when your outcome is strength isn't the best idea. But if it's not your goal, like say for instance, I was saying before, bodybuilding is your goal, structural stability is a goal, you have a lot more play with the way that you actually lay out your training days and your training weeks. So you can shift your mindset to going, well, hey, what do I want to get out of this training session, this phase, and the next few months of my training program, and then program accordingly to that. It doesn't always have to be that descending most neurological down to the least neurological style setup. There's so much variability within that. Now, don't forget, if you were doing like say wave loading, it's a technique it's a very neurological technique that we use within training. If you were to do wave loading, for instance, there's no way you're going to do that in the middle of your training session or towards the end of the training session, because it is so fatiguing. You have to put that at the front. So there's certain rules that you have to stand by. But, in terms of like bodybuilding, structural balance, rehabbing, if your main outcome isn't strength, you have so much play and variety in training splits and in training week. And I think, if you look at the actual training week itself, like, from a powerlifting standpoint, the spacing allocation is really fatigue management. That's all we're trying to do. We're trying to manage someone's fatigue across the week. If someone's bodybuilding, we're trying to manage someone's fatigue across the week. So it's like you're stimulating and you're really pushing a body part area or a main lift or, the outcome of that session, and you're allowing enough time between the next session to recover so that when you come into it, you can give it another 100%. So if you have a look at the actual training week itself, we typically program off like a 7-day calendar, which it does make sense like pragmatically, but it doesn't make that much sense in the real world, because the reality is we should be looking at what's the optimal allocation of spacing between actual sessions. How many days do you need, between a heavy squat and a heavy deadlift? How many days do we need between, a really voluminous and heavy upper body session to a really voluminous and heavy back pulling session, for instance? What's the optimal amount of time that we need between those sessions so that we can recover and we can come in and not do like a half-assed training session? So that's really when you look at the training week and you're looking at your training sessions, it is fatigue management 101. So you want to make sure that, if you are really fatigued towards the back end of the week, that you're putting your best foot forward at the start of the week. And anything that you're trying to work on, anything that you're trying to bring up is at the forefront of your training week. It's a really smart and a really simple strategy that you can do to make sure that you're working on your weak points first. Or say, for instance, a lot of people have quite underdeveloped backs, for instance. So you might say, for each one of my upper body sessions, I'm going to put all my back exercises at the start of the session, even if I'm doing shoulders, even if I'm doing chest and arms that day, because you know that you can really attack the back exercises and put a ton of effort into them at the very start of your training session. It's just a super pragmatic and logical way of looking at it. But if you're on the other spectrum and you're looking at, hey, I want to hit a 1RM in the bench press, you're not going to pre-fatigue your back. You may use some awareness drills and some drills to upregulate your back so it's really nice and stiff and stable, but you're not going to pre-fatigue your back prior to doing bench press. So, when we look at a training program, there's so many ways that you can do your layout, and that's the fun part of training. You can keep things really fresh. In periods of the year, you may actually dedicate and say, hey, the first 4 months of the year, I'm going to do, this particular training split because it gives me an opportunity to work on structural balance. For the middle part of my year, I'm going to work on purely just bringing up muscle mass. So I'm going to put all of the weak areas, or the areas that I want to bring up, at the forefront of my training week and my days. And at the back end of the year, I might say, okay, the last 4 months of the year, I'm going to work on some strength. So that's when you would do your training split, and you might put like your main squat, bench, and deadlift at the very start of your sessions with a really nice allocation of spacing between them for fatigue management. And then basically from that point, you'd be like back into the loop of another 12-month cycle. So you can actually use your training year. If you don't have any like hard deadlines in your training program in terms of like a comp or something like that, you can actually space and allocate your training week in a way that's, really fun and enjoyable, but it also then changes the stimulus up so that you're not just constantly doing the same thing over and over again. Now, don't get me wrong. You're going to be doing sets. You're going to be doing reps. The ethos of the training is exactly the same, but you're just prioritizing what you're trying to get out of it and putting that at the forefront of what it is that you're doing, which is your training week, your training days, and your split. So, when you are looking at your training program, there's very easy hacks that you can improve the outcome of what you're trying to get out of your actual training session itself. That's just one of them. That's it for me today. I'll see you guys on the next episode.